Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today. This is our sixth session and we'll be continuing our quest to learn how to create an API in PHP. We are using the Joomla framework to speed up the process, so links to the Joomla framework can be found below. If this is your first video, I highly recommend that you watch the entire playlist. I've put a link below to the entire playlist so you can watch it from the beginning. I think it will be most helpful to really understand where we are in the process. If you'd like to download the code, please, you can find it on GitHub. So just go to the below link, red blue square /Joomla Framework API, and you can download it from there. Today, we are going to be creating a login routine. So we will first be creating a task within the controller. Then we'll need to pass three pieces of information: the username, the password, and the app token. We'll check the username and password against the database to see if they are valid. If they are, we will then continue to create a token and we'll save the token in the DDC user keys table and we will pass that token back to the user. If the credentials don't validate in the first step, then we simply return to the user a generic message: username or password are incorrect, please try again. So without further delay, let's get coding. So here in our previous tutorial, we created this register routine. So we are just going to copy this and paste it below, and we'll change this to login. So here we are getting the profiles model. The next part we want to do is create a new function called user login. Okay, so once we have this user login, we now need to go to our profiles model. And in here, we need to create the function called users login. So public function user login. And for this, we are going to start off by just checking, is this a post request and is an app token that we're getting? And then we are going to get the other two pieces of information. So I'll copy this top text here and we will place it down here. So we don't need the top three lines. So what we are doing is we're checking, is this a post request? If it is a post request and the app token matches, we then want the username and password. Okay, so we also just need to ensure that this if clause is closed. We are going to return false by default. We are now going to use the username and token. The first part we are going to do is to get this user. Okay, so to get the user, we will say if user equals this gets user. Okay, and the get user function takes three arguments. So we are going to pass in the username, so it will be null username. So at this point, be null and username. So if this turns out to be valid, we are then going to run a function called password verify. And password verify accepts two pieces of information. So first is the password, which the user is passing, and then the second word is the hash, so the hash that we have saved in the database. So the first one is just password, which we have here, and the second one is going to be from the object which we have created. So here we will call it result, password verify, pass in the password and the user password object. And then we will simply return the result. So it is a boolean we will get back, so either true or false. If that works out to be true, we pass it back. If it does not verify, once again, we are simply returning false. One thing that we are going to do here, we are going to change it. So we're not just going to put password, we are going to name our input field SK. So once this has processed, let us save it. Let's go back here and let's save this. So what we actually want to do is say item equals array success of false. So we're creating this array of false in the beginning, and then here we are going to create a user object. And once again, if this user model user login turns out to be true, we now want to authenticate. So we are now going to run a second. We actually do not need to create a variable there, but at this step we will create a user. Let's actually call it item so that we're not duplicating. So we'll just call it item, which has been returned there, is equal to model create user token. At this point, once we know it is authenticated, we are now creating the user token. So once again, we are going to create a public function, create user token. And we are returning the result. In this step, we are following the same process of getting the user credentials using the username. But because it has now been validated, we are not going to revalidate, is this the correct user? So our user is now being passed in, and from here we now want to create a token. In our default model, right at the bottom, we have this public function of rand string gen. So we are just able to create a random string. We can specify the length, and these are the characters that it will accept. So we are going to create our own token. So we will say token is equal to this rand string gen. We will make it 20 characters. We will also create a series. Okay, so both those pieces of information are unique. From the user object, we are also going to get a few other pieces of information. But now we can go ahead and set this information to the DDC user credentials table. Excuse me. Here is our dev1 DDC user keys. These are the fields that we need to insert. We are going to pass in the user ID, a token, a series. Invalid is just going to be 0. We are going to pass in the current time, and then we are also going to pass in a user string. Okay, so here we can actually just get that information, and then in the next line what we want to do is we want to access this user. To get the ID, we want to pass in this token, the series, invalid, which is going to be 0, our time as we are incrementing number, and for our UA string, we are going to set a standard string of DDC JFA, so Joomla Framework API. So here's our data. So user ID token. This user ID actually needs to be DDC. It needs to be DDC user ID. If we go back to our workbench and we go to the user table, you see it's DDC user ID. So our naming convention here needs to be the exact same as that field. And to ensure that is correct, we also need to check over here that this is a DDC user ID from DDC users table. There should be DDC user ID as well. And we also want to get the password. So that was one piece of information that was missing there, and these other fields. Okay, so now that we have our columns and our data, we now set the insert. Okay, and for our inserts, we are going to just insert the columns and the data. So we are just going to create a function here. Sorry, we are going to put an if statement in. And from that, we are then going to just update our result. So here success is false. So here we are going to have these results. Okay, so this user of DDC user ID another one would be the token. Here let's pass in the first name, let's pass in the last name, and let's pass in the email. So there would just be the token. So I want to actually have one more, which is the token expiry. So now we have all of these. We can pass in first name, last name, email, and here where we are getting this time. So here we are saying string to time, we are passing in the current date, and we are also adding 1 day to this time. So let's call it token time, and therefore we will just reference the token time. And here we will reference the token time as well. And finally, we return this result. So now if we go back, we are then getting this item user details, and we are returning that. So if we now go to Postman, we want to pick up this URL, go to new one, set it to post. The URL that we want to access is login, and then in the body we want username, we want SK for password, and we want our app token. So the username, as per our test, username of Usher, and then our password. So if we look at our register, here we used Usher and this test. So here we are going to use Usher 1, 2, 3, 4, and here is the token information. So once this information is set, let's send it through. Now we get an error over here So in our default model, line 108, this query that it is saying it is undefined. So let's take a look what has happened. Here in our default model, if we go to line 108, so here we have a get method, but we would like a post method here. So once we save this and we go back and we send the information through again, success. So here we have our token which is set. So we can also validate this by going to our workbench and checking DDC user keys. So our first one, which has been saved, it also has this. So the two match, which means we are now able to create a new query in our profiles model where we validate the token when the user uses it, and we can use that as an authentication process instead of passing in the username and password every time. We've set a token time limit, so we can also access that to see has time exceeded. If so, then create a new token or request that the user creates a new token. We won't go to that full extent of using the time, but as an example of what can be created, I just wanted to pass that in. So one thing that we still do have, if we look at the success variable here, it's actually showing as false. What we forgot to do is here to actually update our result to have success that equals true. So by carrying out this check and doing the insert, we then want to pass the success of this is actually true and pass the information back. So if we save this, come back to Postman and send the information again, we now get success of true, which is actually the correct information that we wanted. That concludes the session for today, guys. What we have done, we've created the login controller, done some credential verification. Is it the correct username, password that has been requested? If so, we then authenticated that request by getting a token, storing that in the database, and feeding the token back to the user so that they can use it in the future. In our last tutorial series, we'll be looking at actually posting a message. So we'll be using the token to actually send a request. We will authenticate that token once again, see if it's valid. If so, we then post the message. Hope you guys are enjoying the series. Again, all the resources are below. If you have any questions or comments, please guys, leave them below and I will do my very best to get back to you as soon as possible.